What is up, Bleacher Report? Jesse here with Last Second Sports, coming at you with another 49ers daily on this Friday evening. I hope you're geared up to have a fantastic weekend. I know that I am. And things have calmed down a little bit. I think next week we got to start looking at the prospects and who the 49ers should draft. But I think we also have to put a bow right now on free agency, the future of the team. How do they get better? What is the vision? Because the 49ers have a plan. They're not just coming in, slashing all costs, not trying to be competitive at all. I've talked about how these are the right moves for the future, but nobody wants to hear that. People don't care in 2025 about 2026. As Kyle Shanahan said, I don't know if we're going to be alive on Sunday. You know what, Kyle? You're absolutely right. We have no idea if we'll be alive on Sunday. So worrying about 2026 and 2027 with this team, it's a long ways away. I mean, we're still in the offseason for 2025. So what is the plan for this year? What is the vision? Is it truly just a year where you're willing to suck? I've talked about how I believe that this team can compete for the playoffs. Once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen. I think the Washington Commanders are a great example of this. Nobody expected them to make the playoffs last year. They made the playoffs. They won a game that was really kind of a 50-50 game against Tampa. I think most people probably leaned slightly towards Tampa because Tampa was at home. And then they went and played Detroit. And I think everybody was picking the Detroit Lions coming off of a week rest. Yes, the Detroit Lions did have a ton of injuries on defense, but what did the Commanders have? I mean, the Detroit Lions came into the season with Super Bowl aspirations, and here come the Commanders. Say what you want. I mean, that roster top to bottom was not very good. They caught lightning in a bottle with new ownership group, new GM, new coaches, new quarterback, and it really worked out. And so when you look at teams like that, if the 49ers can get into the playoffs, and that is a big if, I totally understand that. This is not going to be a season where most fans are expecting it. I personally am, though. I really, truly believe that the 49ers should be a playoff team. I don't think that we should take those expectations away. And once you're in, anything can happen. So I started to look. Is the plan just simply strip everything away, go to the draft, be successful there, and if we have a good draft, things are going to be great? Or is there some hidden gems on this team that I think maybe might be overlooked right now? And there's five that I found. But before we get there, I kind of want to set this up and the reason for me looking into this. I want to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. They just won a Super Bowl. This is a copycat league. When you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, let's not forget that 2 years ago they were also in the Super Bowl and they came up short. But that Philadelphia Eagles team was one of the best in NFL history. One of only like 4 or 5 teams, maybe even 3 teams, to put up 70 sacks or more in a season. It was absolutely incredible what that defensive front was doing. And just a few short years later, a different team, completely different team, wins the Super Bowl. So let's look at it real quick. 2022 defensive line, Philadelphia Eagles. They run a little bit of a hybrid over there. They have a nose tackle, a defensive tackle, 2 defensive ends, an outside linebacker that rushes. They kind of send 5 at you, and they do it a little bit different over there. But the main 5 guys that you would see starting on that team in 2022 were Josh Sweat, who was still with the team this year. He's the one guy that I'm going to mention that was with this team. Fletcher Cox, the great Fletcher Cox, arguably had a Hall of Fame career, very, very good player. And he ended up retiring after that season. Linval Joseph, also a player that had been in the league for a long time. He was their nose tackle, bounced around the league. He was brought onto the team a little bit later, but he was an instrumental part of that team as the season went along. Javon Hargrave, this is a name that's very familiar. In fact, the season he had that year earned him a major contract with the San Francisco 49ers, one that was ultimately disappointing. And he has now moved on and is playing for the Minnesota Vikings this upcoming year. And then they also had Hassan Reddick, who was phenomenal. This last year, he was seeking record-setting money, was unable to get it. He is now on a one-year deal and kind of bouncing around the league, but still a very, very good player. He just signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But when you compare that front, Josh Sweat, Fletcher Cox, Linval Joseph, Javon Hargrave, Hassan Reddick, just 2 short years later, that whole unit was swept clean outside of one player in Josh Sweat. This year, the defensive front, the one that actually won the Super Bowl, no, they didn't set records. No, they didn't get their 70 sacks. But one thing they did do is when it mattered most in the Super Bowl, they produced at a very high level. That 2022 team, they were a menace throughout the whole regular season, but they didn't disrupt Patrick Mahomes the way that this defensive line disrupted Patrick Mahomes. They didn't wreck the Kansas City Chiefs offense the way this defensive front wrecked that offense. This defensive front peaked at the right time. A lot of young players, but they stepped up when they needed to most. Those players were Milton Williams, who we just saw get a massive contract with the Patriots. Jordan Davis, who was on that team. In fact, both Milton Williams and Jordan Davis and all these guys were on that team a couple years ago, but they weren't the guys yet. So they have Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, who is really the guy. I mean, this is the stud of this defensive front right now. He's what makes everything tick. Nolan Smith, who for a while, a lot of people thought he was going to be a bust, but he started to come into his own this year. And then the aforementioned Josh Sweat was a part of this defensive front as well. But when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, not only did they make sweeping changes from 2022 to 2024, make it back to a Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl, something that other team could not do, but they're doing it again this offseason. They let Milton Williams walk. He got major money from the Patriots. They let Josh Sweat walk. He got major money from the Arizona Cardinals. And why did they let those guys walk? Well, it's because they have 2 guys that are ready to step in immediately. They have Moro Jomo, who was a 7th-round pick out of Texas in the 2023 draft. This was a player that I liked a ton as a prospect. I thought he might go as early as the 4th round, player that I really wish the 49ers had taken. But he's just kind of sat, hasn't gotten a lot of playing time. He's probably going to start for them this year. He's probably going to take over for Milton Williams. And then another player that will be filling in for Josh Sweat, Jalix Hunt, another prospect that I like a lot. 3rd-round pick in this year's draft. He's going to be their new Josh Sweat. And then they will inevitably draft other players to continue to build the depth. And the reason I bring all this up is not to be like, hey, look at the Eagles. They're the best ever, and the 49ers suck. That's not it at all. The reason that I bring them up is that, yes, the draft is going to be extremely important this year. And it is probably true. If the draft is really good this year, the San Francisco 49ers will probably have a much better chance at being competitive. But there are names on this team that are already there that maybe the coaches that are spending time with these players every single day see something in these players that maybe we don't even see. Maybe Robert Saleh sees something in these players that we don't see. And maybe there's a few hidden gems on this team that we're not giving credit for. And I'm not saying all these guys are going to be phenomenal. I don't know if any of them will. But I will say that if a couple of these guys step up, it's going to be massive for the 49ers' chances this upcoming year. And so I've got 5 names that I will be looking at and hoping that at least a couple of them step up. The more the merrier. But 5 names that I truly believe can step up because they have flashed at times. We have heard good things about them. player number one, I think, is pretty obvious. D. Winters. Dre Greenlaw walked this offseason. That was like the biggest fear of 49er fans. You know, a lot of 49er fans feel that if Dre Greenlaw had not gotten injured in the Super Bowl, that they would have won the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, that's not the way that it played out. He did get injured. He tore his Achilles, and that's ultimately what's led to him walking this offseason because he was unable to get back onto the field. He played basically a half of a game this year, looked phenomenal, and then was out again. Came back probably a little bit too early, pushed it a little bit. And now he's with the Denver Broncos. But D. Winters is there. And D. Winters plays a lot like Dre Greenlaw. I mean, if there was a Dre Greenlaw clone as far as style of play, a young Dre Greenlaw, D. Winters would be it. Now, I will say that he's not as polished, obviously, as Dre Greenlaw, but he plays with that same fire, that same energy, that same reckless abandon that we love so much in Dre Greenlaw. And D. Winters has that. So maybe D. Winters can step up and be a starter for this team. Maybe having Robert Saleh in the building makes all the world of a difference for D. Winters. So D. Winters, who was a 6th-round pick in 2023, I fully believe can step up this year, take on a mega role, and be a difference maker for this team. And if he is, not that we'll forget Dre Greenlaw, but maybe paying Dre Greenlaw $12 million a year will be something that we look at in a year from now and be like, probably a blessing they didn't do that because D. Winters was ready to go and he's much less expensive. Another player that I'm looking to take another step this year, and this player did, as a rookie, played really, really good football, was thrust into the game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Levi Stadium, Thanksgiving week. I was there. I was at that game. Happened to be spending time with my family on the West Coast. Took a trip down to Santa Clara, watched this game live, and Talanoa Hufanga went down with what was the injury that ultimately led to him leaving this offseason. And the player that came in and filled in for him did so admirably as a rookie. 3rd-round pick, Jair Tig Brown. And then this year, he fell off a bit. Malik Mustafa came in, Talanoa Hufanga came back, and it just seemed like he regressed a little bit. So now it's his turn, now that the league has caught up to him, to assess the league, take this offseason very seriously, take this starting role by the ears, and make a massive stride forward and be a player for this team. He was a 3rd-round pick. That's not, that's nothing to scoff at. That's somebody that you expect to play some sort of role for you. I'm not asking for him to be an all-pro, but do I think he can prove he's a starting caliber safety in this league? Because I think this last year we had question marks. There were times where he didn't look like a starting caliber safety. And I think a lot of people this offseason were hoping that he would be replaced. And, the 49ers brought in some free agents. Maybe they are looking for competition. Maybe they are looking to replace him, but make it hard for him, Jair. Show that you're a true starter in this league. Step up, play better than you did last year. And I think that that's a player that can certainly step up. We've seen him play good football for a rookie season. So Jair Brown, that's another player that I'll be looking at. Here's a name that's been with the team for a couple of years. Unfortunately, just hasn't been able to get onto the field full time. Has had some injuries, has flashed at times on special teams, but really hasn't been a contributor at all. A 5th-round pick himself from that 2023 draft, Darrell Luter Jr. But when you look at Darrell Luter Jr., I mean, physically, he has everything that it takes to be successful on this team. Physically is not an issue for him. It's, can he stay healthy? I don't know what else is keeping him off the field, other than health. There were some good players in front of him. I mean, Renardo Green came in right away, made an instant difference. The 49ers also got rid of a good player in Samuel Womack, who couldn't make the field. And now he's over in Indy playing really, really good football. Teams and organizations make mistakes. And Just because Darrell Luter Jr. hasn't played yet a ton doesn't mean that he's not ever going to be a player in this league. So I wouldn't sleep on Darrell Luter Jr. either. That spot is going to be available for him. Yes, they brought in Trey Brown to potentially fill that spot. Yes, I'm sure they're going to draft somebody as well. But Darrell Luter Jr. has been on this team now. This will be his third year. He has the opportunity to step up as well and become a starter. That spot is wide open. And if he does so, then that's fantastic. And if he can play at a decently high level, that's even better. Another player that I think has shown promise and growth throughout this last year, an undrafted player from this last year's class, 2024, a player that when I saw in camp was like, this is a camp body. I don't think he's going to make it. But slowly but surely, this player really started to grow on me over the week and a half that I was at camp. And I started to see some things from this player. And I think as the season went along, we saw more and more flashes. And we saw a player physically get used to the NFL game. Not just a big body to be a big body, but actually started to learn how to use their weight, use their strength, play with leverage. And this is a very, very important position for the San Francisco 49ers. I'm not even claiming that this guy's going to be a starter this year or that's not my expectation. But I do think this player can be in rotation. And I think when I look at the San Francisco 49ers and when they've been at their best, it's when they've had a deep defensive line. Right now, when you look at the defensive line, it's wide open. Most people feel like they have to draft 3 starters in this year's draft. And maybe that's true. But this player can add some valued snaps that this team is going to need at a position of desperation. And that's a defensive tackle, Evan Anderson. Evan Anderson certainly flashed at times this year, especially for an undrafted free agent. Physically, he has the right body to come in and get it done. I'm excited to see what Evan Anderson does. I really am. I think year number 2 for Evan Anderson could be a nice year. So Evan Anderson's a player that I'll be looking for. And then I've got one more player, another undrafted free agent. This player was undrafted in 2022, went to the Tennessee Titans, was there very briefly, made it onto the practice squad of the 49ers in 2023, and then flashed at times this year. And if you want to see that this is not a BS thing, you can go back to my camp reports on my channel and see how myself and my partner in crime coach talked about this player. At the time, we didn't even know how to pronounce his name at all. We just called him Sammy O because we didn't know how to say his last name. Sam Okawanu. I had to learn his name. I was forced to learn his name because he started to flash during the season as well. He flashed a ton in training camp, was a monster in training camp. It's like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? Then in the preseason, did the same thing. Regular season came around, injuries happened, and he flashed there too. Sam Okawanu might be a value depth piece on this team. Somebody who's going to get snaps. I'm excited about him. I think body type wise, he is perfect for what the 49ers need. And I think he's explosive. He's starting to figure it out as well. Evan Anderson and Sam Okawanu, watch out for them to be value depth pieces this year. And I believe that they can do that. I believe that, the 49ers moving on from a Malik Collins, moving on from a Leonard Floyd, they didn't necessarily want those guys to be starters. And when you look at it, it's like, man, why would you? Both those guys were healthy all year, and it doesn't make sense to move on from them. And I even talked about Floyd last night and how it didn't make sense to move on from him, especially because you didn't get Joey Bosa. But maybe the 49ers are confident in these two. Maybe the 49ers look at it and say, okay, we do have to go get some starters in this draft, but we have 2 players that are young, inexpensive, fit exactly what Robert Saleh talked about, which is getting younger, getting healthier, getting faster, more athletic. Evan Anderson and Sam Okawanu might just fit the billing. So those are our 2 last names I would look out for. And all of them on defense, by the way. all of them on defense. And when you look at the 49ers and the way the offseason has gone, yes, they've lost a lot of players. But as far as starters go, they've really lost the most on defense. They lost Hufanga, safety, starting safety. They lost Charvarius Ward, starting corner. Well, I just gave 2 players that could potentially fill in for them. They lost Dre Greenlaw. Gave you a player that might be able to fill in for him. And yes, they lost Hargrave. Yes, they lost some other players, but Malik Collins and Leonard Floyd, maybe they feel like Evan Anderson and Sam Okawanu are the guys to fill in for them. So those are my 5 names to look out for. If at least 2 of those guys step into a serious role this year, that's going to be massive for the 49ers defense. And I have no reason to believe that at least 2 of them can't step into a major role. And maybe the 49ers see it the same way. Maybe the 49ers are sitting back kind of laughing like, yeah, everybody's stressing, everybody's worried, but we've got some players on this team that nobody's talking about that we believe can fill serious roles. Somebody in one of my chats, and I also read it in an article, I believe it was from Tim Kawakami's, like, do you think Robert Saleh knew when he signed with this team that the 49ers were going to be gutting it and rebuilding? And if he had known, would he have come to this team? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question fully, but maybe the answer to the question is right there in front of us. And maybe the answer is he's on board with this. Maybe he fully believes in the 5 names that I've given you. Maybe there's another player that I'm missing that he believes in. That's all entirely possible as well. You think he hasn't watched film? Maybe it's a player that they brought in from the outside. Some of these guys that we look at as no names, myself included. And he's like, you know what? This guy's going to be a player for us. So I wouldn't sleep on the fact that Robert Saleh has his hand in this, that he's very comfortable with this movement. So Robert Saleh might very well be very comfortable with these players. And then let me give you another reason to be confident when it comes to the depth chart on this team and maybe some players that might be able to play a difference. There's always this wave of free agency that's happened. And a lot of teams will kind of go through free agency and not make that big splash signing. The 49ers obviously are that team this year. And then there's a crop of players that everybody forgets about. The draft comes and goes. Then training camp starts. Players get injured. And all of a sudden you see a signing of a player and you're like, I didn't know that player was still available. That's a name. That's a name I recognize. That's a decent player. How is he not on a team? So I'm going to give you 5 names real quick of players that are not currently on teams, but I believe can be an impact player if the 49ers need it. Now, I don't know that they're going to last through the draft, but I think there's a good chance that a few of these guys could, if not all of them, because teams are kind of settling down right now. They want to draft. They want to go into the draft. They get excited about it. And then depending on what roster spots they don't fill, they may look to turn to these guys, the 49ers included. And these 5 names, I think, can be kind of difference makers. One of them I talked up all offseason. Everybody said they wanted DJ Jones. And I knew DJ Jones was going to be way too expensive for the 49ers. There was no way they were going to give him a deal that he was going to be seeking and deserves. But a player I talked about that I thought could be a depth piece along that defensive line at defensive tackle that could really, really help in the run game and potentially even start for this team on downs 1 and 2, on the running downs. 2-time Super Bowl champ, Mike Pennell. He's a little bit older. He's like 32, but he's a big body guy. I mean, this is a full-on defensive tackle. This is a guy that requires double teams. You go look at him in the run game on film, it shows up. Some of you may be PFF buffs. If you are, his run game score will show up there as well. Mike Pennell is going to be inexpensive, and assuming he wants to continue playing football, You never know when a guy's, early 30s, they may just call it quits. But if he's out there and available and wants to play, this is a guy that can help you. This is a depth piece that can help you. He played a major role in that Super Bowl against the 49ers just a year ago, and that was on a winning team. So don't sleep on Mike Pennell. Two offensive linemen that are out there currently. One of them I'm more excited about than the other, but Jedrick Wills, he's a younger player, played mostly left tackle in his career, started quite a bit actually for the Cleveland Browns. Listen, I don't think he's a starting level tackle in this league, but I do think he's the type of guy that can come in for a couple games in a pinch, especially when you look at Trent Williams and his age and his ability to stay healthy. I mean, he misses games every year. You're going to need some sort of tackle. Jalen Moore is no longer here. Jedrick Wills certainly can fill in for that spot. So I would look out for him as a possibility. But Will Hernandez is a player that I've always liked. I mean, when he was drafted by the Giants, I liked him. When he played for the Cardinals last year, I liked him. He picked up an injury and was unable to finish the season, but I believe he's going to be ready to go by training camp. This is a good player, a good guard, and the 49ers could use a guard. So I wouldn't put it past him to go after a Will Hernandez, a guy that they saw play up close and personal last year. So this is a player that is certainly a starting caliber guard in this league. And if the 49ers don't come out of this draft with enough depth along the offensive line, Will Hernandez and Jedrick Wills might be names to look at. And then I'm going to give you two edge rushers. You're going to know both of these names. Zadarius Smith. He was traded mid-season last year to the Detroit Lions. Still has plenty of tread on the tires. Yes, he's a little bit older, right? He's like up there with Leonard Floyd, but he's produced in this league many years, and he will continue to produce as a rotational pass rusher. So if you need some added depth, Zadarius Smith could be your guy as far as a rotational pass rusher, a true player in this league, and he will be rostered at some point if he wants to continue to play football. I have no doubt about that. And then one more player that I would keep an eye out on, which is Charles Omenihu. If you remember, the 49ers traded for him from the Houston Texans a few years ago. He came in immediately, was a disruptor. And this is a player that knows this system, has thrived in this system. He went to the Chiefs. He flashed for them as well, but he had a major injury, and then he was suspended due to PED usage. And then when he came back from his injury, he just was unable to get onto the field because they had kind of already filled the role, and now he's a free agent. But I think he's only like 26, 27 years old. Charles Omenihu is still a player in this league. So, when you look at these names, these are all names that should be familiar to you, and none of them are rostered, and there's more out there. So if the 49ers get through the draft and it's like, oh my gosh, they didn't get all three starters, they didn't get enough depth, and what are we gonna do? And you know, they get into early camp and these five names that I gave you, none of them are flashing. And oh my gosh, what these are five players that are out there right now and may still be available way down the road that can definitely help a team win. And in fact, a couple of these guys have Super Bowl victories. A couple of them have played in the playoffs very recently. So all is not lost just because they didn't sign the big name free agent, just because we're not able to necessarily see these players day in and day out up close and personal doesn't mean that there aren't players that can make an impact. So I'm excited about the direction of the team mainly because of the future, but you need to have some excitement about 2025 and the possibilities as well. And maybe there's some players out there that are on this roster now or could potentially be available after the draft is over to be on this roster that can surprise you and maybe make you feel a little bit better about the direction of your San Francisco 49ers.